What is happening with the Nets? Is there a way for them to turn the season around? What will happen to the trade deadline? What is the future and the short term of this team? Here with Erik Slater of ClutchPoints and Bleav in Nets podcast. We're going to get into it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR.com. If you need projections for FanDuel or DraftKings, head on over to DFSR.com. Got you covered there every single night. No Adam Armbrecht on the podcast today. Massive upgrade here, talking with Erik Slater of ClutchPoints of the Bleav in Nets podcast, here to break down what is happening in this Nets season. If there's any hope around the corner, what's going to come in the short term, what's going to come in the long term. Erik, how's it going, brother?
It's going well, man. Appreciate you for having me on. Really appreciate the work you guys do. I don't know if you could say massive upgrade. You guys do a pretty good job over here, but always good to talk some Nets ball.
Just to be clear, only a massive upgrade on Adam. It's a neutral move. If we swap Adam around, it's a neutral move. But for Adam not to be here, for you to be here, massive upgrade. I mean, I know he always appreciates stuff like that. Okay, Nets are in Paris here. We are still stateside talking about the team. It's been a very up and down season, and that is a massive understatement. It feels like around where this team started. Where they sort of were in the middle section of the season so far and where they are now. Let's start just like state of the team. You're with the team a lot. You know, you're covering the team every single day. What do you feel like is the general feeling around this team right now? We'll get into the nitty gritty around like different players, Jacque Vaughn, all this other stuff. But like, if you sort of had to summarize your feelings about the state of the Nets as they left to go to Europe, into this Paris game, like where would you put like sort of the general feeling around the team right now?
I'd say they're a team that's just struggling to find consistency. I mean, when you look at the grand big picture of where they're at, I would say that they're underperforming, although I would say not by as big amount as some people think. And I think that the reason that it may seem that way is, you know, when they've been hot, they were hot. They won, 6 or 7 or 7 of 8. And then since then they've lost 12 of their last 16. So I feel like the lack of consistency makes it feel like the team is performing a lot lower than they are. I do think that they're underperforming, but I do think if you came into this season, the record of where they're at, it's not too far off from where you could have expected them to be. But I do think that during this recent stretch that they're performing well below expectations. And I think that all the players on the team, the coaches recognize the lack of consistency. And I think that they really felt coming into this season, were confident that they could be performing at a level higher than what they are right now and really challenge and push into that playoff picture. So I don't think it's a team that's hopeless. I do, I'm around the guys in the locker room, and it's still a team that like the mood isn't just completely like shocked by these recent struggles, but they're a team that I think holds themselves to a higher standard than where they're at right now and believe that they should be performing higher than they are. Because if you remember, they have a lot of guys on this team that have played a lot of winning basketball, for other organizations, obviously, but they're not all used to this extent of struggles. So I do think they're a group that's not, bereft of hope right now, but they're a group that recognizes that they're not performing where they should be.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like typically the way people, or really sports is a good example of this, the way you feel is sort of like expectation over reality, right? So if the expectation is super low and you're 16 and 21, you're like, oh my God, you're doing, might as well just run a parade down Flatbush Ave. But if you are, over 500, or if you have aspirations of the playoffs and now you find yourself in the same state, it can feel like the sky is falling. So I think it's good for you, the way you phrased it there, to like kind of say like, it's probably not as bleak as it seems. And sometimes evaluating teams at their lowest points is not fair. It's just like evaluating teams at their highest points is not fair, right? And the Nets, because the Nets right now, if you look at their projected win total, they're right around a little north of 35. They came into the season right around 36.5, 37.5. So they're not off too far with where the preseason expectation was. It was just that early season maybe set it. Like, do you feel like that? Like the early season?
Yeah.
Like, was that like a blip on the rate? Was that like sort of like that was more noise than signal, like how they performed early.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that, early in the season, I think even through those first few weeks, like if you look at the opening games of the year against Cleveland, against Dallas, against some of those other teams, they lost nail biters where you saw some of the concerns that people had about the team entering the year kind of rear its head. But they were performing and they were competing on a night in, night out basis, and they were competitive with teams. And they really, for the most part, early on took care of the teams that you would expect them to. So I think that that's the biggest, shift over these last 16 games. And I'm by no means trying to say that these last 16 games haven't been concerning. They absolutely have. When you're losing to teams like, the Wizards, like the Trailblazers, when you're getting blown out by other good teams, like they're performing under a level of where they should be right now. And honestly, in my opinion, a lot of that falls on the defensive end, because this is a team that came into the year with high defensive expectations. And while I think some of those may have been overblown based on some of the personnel that were going to be playing, I do think that they are way underperforming on that end. And honestly, the effort on that end has been what is most concerning to me over these last 16 games, because in order to just have a high floor and be a team that we thought that maybe they could be, you have to be much better on the defensive end than what they have been right now. I mean, over these last 16 games, they're 27th in defensive rating. I don't think their personnel is as good as some people made it out to be entering the year, but they're much, much better than 27th over the last 16 games and 24th for the season. So really, they have to improve on that end if they hope to have the consistency that they need to kind of meet some of the expectations they had entering the year.
I want to talk about Jacque Vaughn, so I want to avoid this Vaughn part for 1 second with this next question, if this is even possible. But when it comes to the defense, like you said right there, do you think it's more a let's just assume that the defensive players are what they are. So forget about the expectation. Just these are the guys, this is what it is. Where they rank right now, would you say, having watched them every game and talked to everybody about this, would you say the problems are more effort or more scheme? Do you think, and you're fine to hedge your bets here and just say they're both, but where, because I feel like that is a source of debate and consternation around the fan base here about what is the bigger problem? Is it that the players don't care, or is it the scheme just stinks, or is it some combo?
I would lean more towards the players. I don't think that the scheme is maximizing the, some of the skill sets that the guys have. But I wrote an article recently. The biggest problem that the Nets have had over these last 16 games is that they can't defend the 3-point line at all. And that has coincided with them not being able to shoot the ball well like they were earlier in the season. So the defensive strategy of kind of being more in the drop coverage as opposed to switching, kind of trying to funnel some teams into taking above the break threes, being in position to rebound under the basket. Earlier in the year, it was working great and nobody was complaining because opponents were missing. And the Nets were shooting at literally the best 3-point percentage in the NBA. So they were gaining a huge advantage there, every night. And over these last 16 games, I just wrote an article about it. Opponents are making the shots, but I went through actually, I think it was 2 days ago, and I looked at nearly every three opponents had made over these last 16 games. And while there's a lot of them where I think that the coverage is leaving a lot to desired in terms of really packing in the paint and protecting it and leaving guys open on the perimeter, there's just as many threes where it's guys, being late in transition. The transition defense is just horrendous. So that you're giving up the 6th most fast break points in the NBA. And obviously some of that is a product of them not being good offensively. So opponents are having a lot of opportunities to run, but there's transition. Then there's a lot where, defenders are just falling asleep, navigating off ball screens or relocations. Guys are just getting to spots where they're open, where they shouldn't be. And that has nothing to do with scheme. That's really just a product of focus and being locked in, not falling asleep off the ball. And then the third thing is the Nets just have some limitations defending at the point of attack right now. With Ben Simmons sideline, when you have Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas out there defending at the point of attack, there's only so much that a coach can do if those guys aren't going to be able to hold their own whatsoever in their individual matchups. And Cam Thomas is a guy that obviously a lot of fans feel very passionately about, and they want him out there. But if you're going to complain about the defense, if you look at the film over these last 16 games, Cam Thomas has been not good defensively. Neither has Spencer Dinwiddie. And I think that's why you saw in the last game, the Nets really just trying to find something that works, going to Dennis Smith Jr. But even when they go to Dennis Smith Jr. down the stretch of that Trailblazers game, they're doubling on the ball. Anthony Simons is getting whatever he wants. So there's limitations of the scheme. I do think that it's a little bit soft and it's a little bit letting offenses come to you as opposed to attacking them. But can you really attack that much when you have those limitations defending at the point of attack? So that's really kind of how I would summarize that.
Yeah, that's all great points. And like we've talked about this for a while too, about like those Dinwiddie and God forbid the Dinwiddie plus Thomas pairings. My goodness, like the defense on those. Like, once you get them both,
yeah, I've been
know,
surprised.
I'll never understand it because like you can't look at a single number that shows that like there's anything there with that. It's been a total train wreck. All right, we got more to talk about here. Have to get into everyone's other favorite topic of conversation, which is Jacque Vaughn. We'll get into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. Look, PrizePicks is daily fantasy made so easy. PrizePicks just took all the best parts of fantasy, removed the more difficult and annoying parts, and made really basically the best product out there when it comes to daily fantasy. All you're doing on PrizePicks is you're going more or less on the PrizePicks projections, and that's just the numbers they're putting up there. For NBA, it's easy. It's like points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. For NFL, you're going player touchdowns, rushing yards, receiving yards, all the different kind of combinations. You can pile together just players from NBA and NFL. So you get your 5 players. You can win up to 25 times your money as well. You can put the contest entries in just a couple of minutes. Very, very easy over on PrizePicks. All you do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, old friend, good friend, Jacque Vaughn. Let's talk Vaughn here because obviously there's been, you mentioned Cam Thomas as like sort of like I would call fan sticking points, right? Things that we get hyper focused on. And once you see something as a fan, I think this probably goes to all sports. You cannot unsee it, whether it's true or not, right? So like it no longer matters whether there's reality behind it. Once you see something, there's like a fixation. Now, I'm not saying that this shouldn't be the case here with Vaughn, but obviously Jacque Vaughn, whenever a team is underperforming, you have to look at the coach, right? Like I know you mentioned the players and the effort thing, and I think that's all really fair. And so actually, frankly, something you don't hear too often from people. But when it comes to Vaughn, there's, you can't look at a losing streak and not sort of look at the coach. Let's just high level thoughts on Vaughn and job security. I want to get to the player side of this here in a second with like some of their quotes and reactions. But where do you see like Vaughn's job security right now through this swoon? Like, do you think it's ultra safe, tenuous? I don't know. I don't want to put the words in your mouth. Like, where do you see Vaughn right now, like in terms of the job?
Well, you asked me about scheme and players, and I said that, a lot of it lies on the players and their effort. But who's responsible for getting the players to perform at their max effort and perform to their capabilities? That's the head coach. So I'm by no means absolving Jacque Vaughn of that responsibility, because at the end of the day, if guys are falling asleep navigating off-ball screens and things along those natures, that's the coach's responsibility to get them to perform and be locked in and be at that position. Now, you can argue how much of it is on the coaches and how much of it is on the players, and I think that that's fair. You can also say that when players have glaring limitations, it makes it more difficult for a head coach, but it's still his job to try to cover those up to the best of his ability. When it comes to job security, I think that the Nets would have to go on these struggles, they're 4-12 or their last 16. These would really have to extend, I think, for another extended period for Jacque's job to be in serious jeopardy. I'm not reporting that with any inside information. I'm just saying my opinion. And I think that, this is a season where the Nets were really trying to see what they have. I've been calling it somewhat of an audition period in terms of the Nets wanting to find players. They have all these guys. A lot of them are, veterans or approaching veteran status. And when they try to make that leap back into contention, they're trying to determine this year which ones do they want to have here for the long run. And I think that extends to Jacque Vaughn. I think, this is a guy that, while I think they don't want to fire him and they don't want to continue this coaching carousel, I do think that he's being evaluated as everybody else is, as is the case every season, but particularly in a year where you're trying to determine how you're going to pivot into that next, era. So I think that early in the year, I think a lot of people, would have thought Jacque Vaughn was doing a very good job. I think things have flipped on their head over these last 16 games. You can argue whether that's, opponent shooting luck, whether that's a product of scheme, whether that's a product of roster limitations, whatever. But the bottom line is this team is underperforming where they are expected to. If that is the case for another extended period, I do think that the Nets can be evaluating things heading into, the years coming into pivoting into the new era.
And it's funny too, because I think I'm really never one to call for jobs. I don't like it. It feels weird to me. And so I don't do it. And maybe I know there's people out there that get frustrated with that from us as a podcast but we're just not going to do it. That being said, I think that there is really fair criticism here around scheme, around effort. And I think you make a great point. Like if you can't get the players to play with max effort, especially when the writing is on the wall with in terms of the standings and all this other stuff, that is a major problem. I also think that if you were to relieve Jacque Vaughn of his duties, you would have a lot of the same problems, right? I don't think that would alleviate. Is that a fair criticism here? Or that
Yeah.
you'd be left with a roster that doesn't have tons of high-end talent. There's other organizational issues here beyond Vaughn. That's not absolving Vaughn. I'm just saying that you'd be for a harsh reality that I don't think that would change all that much.
There's a lot of harsh realities with this team that, I follow Nets Twitter and I see what fans post, and fans seem to think that, everything is always greener. Fans are frustrated with Cam Thomas not playing point guard and Spencer Dinwiddie being in there. And I look at the numbers and I look at the games and I'm like, if you throw, Cam Thomas out there on an island, maybe it's good for his development. And that's another conversation. Things aren't going to look pretty in the short term if you're throwing him out there on an island at point guard. So, and the same thing extends to Jacque Vaughn, where I think that there's fair criticisms of him. I think that, one that I've seen over this, over the beginning of this season, and it could have been expected entering the year, because this is a team that doesn't have a star player. Everybody knows that, depending on how you view a guy like Mikal Bridges. But what they do have is a lot of capable players, a lot of guys who are good, rotation players in the NBA. They're 8, 9, 10 deep in that regard. And the thing that has really struck me during this period is that there's really no established pecking order of this team of who is the go-to guy. Obviously Mikal Bridges isn't normally a high usage ball handler. He's not that type of player. Then you have guys like, obviously Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas, Lonnie Walker off the bench early in the year. But it's when you don't have that established pecking order and you're just shuffling guys in and out of roles, whether it be a Spencer Dinwiddie early in the year when Ben Simmons was healthy, to what he did, in that midway point from Cam Thomas being on the bench, then back in, leading the offense, getting hurt. Now he's taking a little bit more of a back seat. It's when these roles are continuously changing, it's going to be tough to develop consistency. So while it's really difficult, I do think that that's something the Nets could look to improve. But I think that improvement might be seen after the trade deadline, when a lot of things are sorted out and there's a lot more clarity around this roster in the short to mid to long term.
All right, great. You brought up the trade deadline, which is where we were going to go next. We're going to do that here in 1 second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Jase Medical. Look, we come to sports to escape some of the crazy realities of life, but we can just talk for a minute about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle. Some of the worst flu season over a decade. It can be super scary, especially if you've been dealing with some of the sicknesses. You can't imagine a more helpless feeling than you or one of your family members got sick while supply chain issues kept them from life-saving medications they need. Thankfully, we're all going to be okay because there's Jase Medical. Jase Case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, among others. This stuff can happen to any of us. Look, I've been down this road before where you just can't get what you need, especially when it comes to the kids. It's just too scary to think about. Take it off your brain space here with Jace Medical. Visit jasemedical.com. Complete your physician encounter. Will be reviewed by a board-certified physician. Your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy, fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com. Use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's jasemedical.com. Offer code LOCKEDON. $20 off your order, jasemedical.com. All right, trade deadline. We are coming up on it here, less than a month away. February 8th is the trade deadline. Nets stand in a very interesting position in terms of sort of the pieces they have, how they might be viewed across the league, and sort of what their ultimate goals are, which for me leave me generally confused about how they view sort of the rest of the season. There's a scary sort of outcome here that I wonder if you'll touch on for scary, not real life scary, but basketball scary. Where do you see the Nets going into the trade deadline? Or as a better question, maybe, what do you think the team will look like after the trade deadline? Where do you what do you think their goals are going in here? And do you see what kind of changes do you see possibly coming as we roll into February 8th?
As I said, I think that this year is being used as somewhat of an audition period, for lack of a better term, trying to determine which guys are going to be here for the long term when they do try to make a step towards being more competitive. I've seen some things, on Nets Twitter about people wanting the fire sale, people wanting the rebuild. I do not see that happening whatsoever, just based off of knowing how a lot of how things operate, and also seeing some of the moves that they're making, which are signaling a team that is trying to stay competitive at all costs, as opposed to maybe putting a premium on player development. So when, you come into this trade deadline, for me, I think it all centers around Brooklyn's veterans and impending free agents. The free agents, that's Nic Claxton, Spencer Dinwiddie, Royce O'Neal, even Lonnie Walker the fourth. And then obviously Dorian Finney-Smith is a veteran who's a trade candidate as well. And when you look at those guys, it could go in a lot of different directions. Nic Claxton is a guy who's going to be unrestricted free agent. Obviously, we know that there's been a lot of talk about where his market could be at, whether the Nets want to pay him. They already have Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges under contract, in the mid $20 million per year range. So if you have him and you're trying to sign Nic Claxton at a similar number, and then you're trying to, bring in a star somewhere down the line, it doesn't mean that they have to trade him. I wrote about this earlier in the year. They could, extend him, give him his contract as they did Cam Johnson, and figure it out later. I think that's a real possibility. But with Claxton, if they are to extend him, that impacts their ability to retain those other guys that I talked about: Spencer Dinwiddie, Royce O'Neal, Lonnie Walker the fourth. So it really gets to a point where a lot of it is money involved. I think that the Nets aren't trying to, completely turn over their roster right now. I think that they are trying to see where the trade value is for guys. And if the value is at where they think it's going to be a peak, they're going to try to capitalize. But I've wrote about this several times also. The Nets are going to try to stay out of the luxury tax next season. I would pretty much say they're going to, because there's a CBA clause called the repeater tax that they want to reset. Basically, that is teams exceeding the luxury tax line 3 times in 40 years are taxed just at this insane continuous rate based on how much further you go over their luxury tax line. And right now they have around 117 million committed to 8 players for next season. The luxury tax is set for 172 million. So if you do the math there, I'm bad at math off the top of my head. That's like 54 million. Yeah. So you have guys, you have Claxton, you have Dinwiddie, you have O'Neal, you have Walker. It's going to be difficult to bring all of those guys back. So basically, out of those 4, you could throw Dorian Finney-Smith in that conversation. I do expect them to be active and some assortment of those guys to be moved, whether that's Claxton, allowing them to retain some other guys, whether that's Claxton and some guys, giving them some ability to bring in some other guys using some exceptions in the offseason. That's the question, but I do expect them to be active at the trade deadline.
All right, I want to talk Ben Simmons, but I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick. I'm just going to say a guy. You're going to say either still on the team or traded at the trade deadline. Ready? Dorian Finney-Smith.
Still on the team, I'd say.
Royce O'Neal.
Still on the team.
Oh, no. Spencer Dinwiddie.
This is tough. I'd say still on the team, honestly.
See, it's crazy. I was worried you were going to say that, because this is we're going to run out of time and I want to talk about Simmons, but this is my scary version was that, right? Which is like, you're incentivized to keep winning at the cost of like being able to actually just recoup and get worse in the short term. And uncomfortably worse, right? Like, cause you watch that pick go out to Houston and ends up being a good pick. And you're like, it looks brutal, but it's also feels possibly like throwing good money after bad.
And just to clarify, I think that's definitely playing a role. Like, they do not want to go backwards. I think they would incrementally if they were able to capitalize on value for some of these guys. But, it's tough to say. Honestly, like, Claxton is a guy who I think teams would have interest in. I don't know if you were going to get to him, but he's a guy that I think is realistic to be moved. Does this Day'Ron Sharpe injury throw a wrench into that? That's something that we could talk about. It shouldn't.
Well, I didn't throw him in there because I felt like he was part of that group, but then I felt like you've like kind of spelled out the two sides of it. Well, I'll say that right now. Claxton on the team or no?
Yeah. Okay. Honestly, I think that there is a decent chance that they trade Claxton.
Interesting. Okay.
For all of these guys, like, I don't think that it's necessarily them trying to stay competitive at all costs. Like, everybody says that, everybody thinks in a perfect world, like, you're going to trade O'Neal, you're going to get a good first-round pick. You're going to trade Finney-Smith, you're going to get 2 first-round picks. The market might not be there. And if it's not, they could be in a position where they want to extend some of these guys and maybe try to trade them at a later point where that value could be a little bit higher. Now, you could argue they're getting older. Is that value going to be higher? Basically, my point, of what I said before is between Claxton, Dinwiddie, O'Neal, like out of these guys, it's going to be tough to retain all of them and just keep kicking the can down the road. So some assortment of those guys, I do expect to be on the move. And I do think it's really coming down to part trade value and then part also how do they evaluate these guys during this season and do they expect them to be in it for the long haul? So, difficult exercise. You put me on the spot there, but
no, I know.
I do
it's
think
mostly,
I do think that there's a realistic possibility that one or more of these guys could be on the move.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a fair thing. I think I'm mostly with you. It's that I don't think it's realistic. I think the two things are unrealistic. One, for them all to get traded, and two, for them to have like this crazy market value where the Nets are, reaping multiple first round picks. I agree with that part where it's like, or if they were first round picks, I was saying this the other day, like you have to tier these picks. Like if they were first round picks, they'd be so late in the first round because they're going to good teams and they're just not. All first round picks aren't created equally. Okay, final thought here. Ben Simmons.
Last thing, I do I'm not saying they can't get that for those guys. Like I do think a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith will have a lot of value. I think that Royce O'Neal should have good value also. I said no to Dinwiddie because I'm not sure where his trade value is right now. And while he's not playing well and he's a lightning rod for Nets fans, it seems like a lot of people don't like him, but he's really the team's only point guard right now with Ben Simmons out. So if the value's not there for him and they're maybe looking at, a couple second round picks for him and salary fillers, are they going to do that and then not have a point guard for the rest of the season? That's kind of where my thought process was there. So, I said that early in the year with Ben Simmons out, Dinwiddie is not really a guy that I saw them trading. And especially with him not really performing well as of late and that trade value probably not being where they thought it might be at. So, yeah.
If you run the exercise we did this on a couple of podcasts ago. If you run the exercise of possible Dinwiddie landing spots, there just weren't any, right? Yeah. There weren't you just run down the teams that could use him or that would be incentivized to trade for the kind of archetype that he is. And they just didn't really exist. Okay. Final thoughts here. Ben Simmons. In some ways it feels like he's not in the team anymore. And then there's other versions of it where he's coming back kind of soon. So I don't know. I'm not even going to preface this with anything besides that. Where do you stand with Ben Simmons, right now in terms of timeline for returning / ability to contribute over, honestly, I'll just throw these two things, the rest of this season and next season, because they still have him under contract at $40+ million.
So starting with timeline, they said that, we got a report from Brian Lewis. The Nets said pretty much, I tweeted about this yesterday, and it was a little bit of a mini controversy, but the Nets said, I think today, it's 3 weeks ago, that he was, beginning to see some strength improvement, that he was, ramping up on-court work, and that they were going to provide another update in approximately 2 weeks. Now, they hadn't done that, and on Friday, Jacque Vaughn was asked about it and gave an update. So lack thereof an update, not really an update. He said he was on the court doing work. He said it was with coaches and stuff along those lines. Today there was actually some video posted on Twitter of Ben doing some stuff on court, but he's moving at half speed in every drill. So it's kind of tough to tell. When it comes to some shoot around stuff,
there was some shoot around stuff with him that went up too, where he was on the court.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Just to clarify for people listening, it wasn't like training stuff. It was shoot around, right? I mean, we're talking about the same thing.
When it comes to timeline, literally anything you say right now is going to be speculative because we talked to Ben, I think it's a little bit less than 3 weeks ago now. And he literally said, I don't have a timeline. I don't know. With this type of injury, you just don't know. Now he's on the court doing some stuff. So that would lead you to believe that he's progressing, but it could be, 2-3 weeks. It could be a month. It could be 2 months. We just don't know because this is an injury that obviously is very unpredictable. So that's when it comes to timeline, he seems to be trending in a direction, but we just don't know. He's ramping up. All the Nets are always ramping up. That's the term that we always say. But when it comes to confidence in him being able to contribute, we're going on 3 years now of Ben, frankly, not playing basketball and not being available. And we literally just had last season him missed 3 extended stints in the first half of the year. Then he's forced out of the All-Star break and he's shut down for the entire second half of the season. with a nerve impingement in his back. He spent about 7-8 months going through what was called an intense rehab to try to get to a point where he was comfortable, playing again, being at a good physical state. He said that he was, and then we got 6 games into this season, and he went out with, while for some reason his agent said it's nothing similar and it's different, he went out with what is being called the same injury, although in a different spot. So if you have a player that got injured at last year's, going into the All-Star break, was out for 7 to 8 months, really working hard at this rehab process and saying that he felt great, and then you get 6 games into the year and he's out for 2-3 months with the same injury, I don't know how you could have any level of confidence that the guy is going to come back and be able to be on the floor and contributing for a extended period without injury. So that's kind of where I stand with Ben. I'll believe it when I see it. Brian Lewis, who does great work for the New York Post, did a piece right after I think Ben got the diagnosis. He talked to doctors, and they said, this is their words, that the type of injury that he has can be reoccurring and unpredictable. And then they said that the bulging disc that he had surgery on in the 2022 offseason, the microdiscectomy is the name of the procedure he had. The analogy that they use is that it's like patching up a hole in a tire, and that they said word for word, it'll never be the same. So given all that, based on a 3-year sample size of this, I don't know how you could expect anything else at this point. It's kind of when Ben's on the floor, when he's playing for an extended period, you'll believe it. But right now, to expect that is kind of, it's not logical based on what we've seen.
I'll take it one step further. I'll never believe it. And I'm not trying to be harsh here, but it's just like, I know you're doing a good job of sort of like taking your stance is realistic. I'll just take it one step further. At this point, based on the number of games he's played, and I'll go even back to Philly, where he sat out the whole season, and the pushback on that as well, it's not basketball related. To me, it's all related. Like once you sit out, it all counts. It doesn't matter. It counted with Kyrie. It counts when you sit out for any reason, because once you sit out for any reason, it means you can sit up for any reason. I think he's hurt right now, by the way. So it's not that. I think this is like legit injury. I'm just saying it all factors in. And when you've played something like 20% of the games or less over the available games over the last 3 years, you just can't. Like I think it's just complete. To me, it's completely cooked, and it's all found money, even though it's incredibly expensive. Found money.
That was pretty much the wording that I used. I wrote an article about this right after Ben got diagnosed, or his agent Bernie Lee came out and gave the prognosis of that nerve impingement, because I thought, I've said this, but I thought the reporting of the situation was so not strange, because we've seen reporting of his injuries be weird, but first it's hip soreness, then it's a hip contusion, and then his agent comes out and says that it's a back impingement, a nerve impingement in his back. And I just said that while the injury that forced him out at last year's All-Star break was a nerve impingement, the agent said that it's nothing similar to what Ben experienced last season, and this is a short-term thing and a day-to-day evaluation is what he said. We're two plus months in, and he hasn't played. So, that's kind of where I'm at with it. And it's getting to a point where if he's back on the floor, that's great. But like you said, it's all kind of gravy. And the Nets, this was the focus of the article I wrote. They can't be banking on him to plan anything around this. And it seems to some extent like they were entering the year, which is a little concerning. It can't be when Ben gets back, this defensive scheme is going to look better. Or when Ben gets back, the transition offense is going to be there and things are going to look better. We're going to be jacking up threes at the rate we want to. When Ben gets back, it can't be that, because Ben's never back. He's never on the court for an extended period. So to plan and expect for him to be that and plan things around him is literally insanity. It's expecting, a different result when you're doing the same thing over and over again. So, Ben, if he comes back, that's great. It could be a bonus for the Nets, but the Nets team, coaches, fans, nobody should be planning and expecting things to all be fixed, based on Ben getting back, because as we've seen, history says that he's not going to be on the court for an extended period.
Yeah, no, I think it's cooked. I think it's over. I think it's, a couple game stretches here and there. And I actually don't even think that's the expectation. To me, it's just the reality. Maybe I'm being totally unfair, but I just think if you're looking at it probabilistically, like if you're Bayesian this thing, like you just can't go any other way. You'd be insane. You'd be insane if you were super in any way, even on the right side of bullish. I just don't even know how you can do it. Okay, we're going to get Erik out of here. Much appreciated, Erik, jumping in for this extended talk on the Nets. Always great insider information bring in because Erik's covering the team every single day over there on ClutchPoints, over on Bleav in Nets podcast. Erik, thank you so much for coming on today.
Appreciate it, man. Hope to talk to you soon.
All right. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We get to the end of the podcast when Adam is not here. He always brings the quotes from the great American poets. No quote today. We'll just say Erik Slater over there, one of the great American poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.